I recently caught myself having fun while playing Deadlock, and obviously that's a big no-no, so I had to punish myself by making and then playing this build. Because the most fun way to play Lash is of course to launch yourself into the stratosphere as often as possible and come thundering down to smite your enemies as the god of combat. And thus, the least fun way to play Lash is to do the opposite of this, of course. This is the day the Lash stood still, the build that turns the most fun and mobile playmaker into like a bootleg spirit carry. Okay, so about 4 months ago, I posted a video talking about how buffing Flog makes the Deadlock experience worse because what makes Lash fun is completely antithetical to the ability just in its entirety, and it's just completely outdated. It's an ability designed for how lifesteal used to work, and it doesn't work like that anymore, so the ability just kind of sucks, and it's by far the least fun part of his kit to use. This build needs a bit of explanation around it. First of all, they didn't actually buff Flog this time. They most recently buffed Ground Strike to being back to a 6-second cooldown. It's literally everything I ever asked for, so I made this build because I can actually stomach playing it now, since there's an actually fun version of Lash I can go back to. And secondly, well, the usually Lash plays position 4, a playmaker, as I've seen it described. If you don't know what position means in relation to MOBAs, just know that the higher your position is, the lower farm priority you should typically have. Thus, someone like Paige is position 6, the lowest priority, and someone like Vendor is position 1, the highest. However, this build, the day the Lash stood still, aka the Flog build, actually morphs Lash more into a spirit carry than a playmaker. And the term spirit carry is kind of a paradoxical term. I mean, generally most carry heroes, or position 1s, are mostly M1 or gun heroes that have a little bit of hybrid spirit damage on the side. Or a lot, depending on who you ask, like 7. And this is because across the board, gun damage increase just scales much better than spirit damage increases do. This is why most spirit-focused damage dealers are much more effective in the early game and much weaker in the late game, like Apollo. So therefore, a spirit carry is kind of something that doesn't really exist. It's very rare, like a white whale or a certain unicorn that I hate. There's really only a handful of heroes that fit into this category naturally. Well, that depends on who you ask as well. Why do I bring this up? Because this build sucks. It's just not an optimal way to play the hero. However, because it's off meta, it's entirely unexpected. Because spirit carries aren't that common, the Flog build's one advantage is the fact that they won't see it coming. After all, everyone knows to look out for Lash Stomp, but few are ever prepared for the Shadow Weave boosted Flog with Mystic Reverb and an Echo Shard to boot. So let's talk about the actual build. What you see before you is the first item you will be buying for this build. You will only be buying one of these items is actually a lie, so I don't know why I wrote that, because you will be buying both monster rounds and extra regen at least at some point. But for now, you're only buying one of these items. 90% of the time I've found it's going to be either monster rounds or extra regen anyways, because you're buying one of these two to help you win the lane. That's what the other items are there for, but generally it's monster rounds or extra regen. And this is because you're going to try to play the game almost like a position 1 or 2 on Lash when playing this build. You need a lot of farm and you don't need to care about winning the lane very much. This is your purple spike. There isn't much to say about it other than the fact that I've clearly taken the liberty of making it a 3-item spike rather than Lash's 4 usually. And this is because Mystic Expansion's for babies who can't hit their Death Slam, and you don't really need Mystic Burst in the early game for this build, so I've replaced them both with compressed cooldown. QSR is also here, and you may recall that I hate this item on Lash because half the item is effectively useless and the extra spirit power it gives is genuinely not worth it. And I stand by that. I mean, this build is literally built around giving Flog as much spirit power as possible, and while I'm sporting a hell of a lot more healing than usual with this build in the endgame stats, the amount of healing is really still just not worth the trade-off of doing less damage than if you just built like a normal person. In other words, I'm taking the lack of this build's effectiveness as an argument against QSR on Flog ever because it's just not that good. And also, if you're good at the game, you just don't need to heal as much. Skill issue. These are your mid-game buys, and I've separated the boxes because you generally want to buy all of the left box before the right box, but hey, sometimes I like to get Healing Booster right after I buy Pristine Emblem instead of Shadow Weave first. As I said earlier, this build requires a lot of farm, so Cultist is pretty necessary here. I don't buy Egg. I don't actually have a reason why I don't buy Egg, but I don't know. You could probably make it work. Also, because we are the Lash no matter what way we're playing, it enables us to use Cultist more like Pocket does than Vendor might. And to explain what I mean, Cultist Sacrifice is an item that can both be like a blunt weapon or a precision tool. If you're playing Venator, you want to swing that fucking thing around as often as possible, immediately when it comes off cooldown like a blunt weapon. But as Pocket, well, their entire job is, of course when not fighting, is to invade the enemy jungle, because they have such absurd amounts of escape they can do this practically without issue. You know, if you know how to pilot the hero. Therefore, when Pocket uses Cultist Sacrifice, it actually isn't necessarily for their farm, but to deny the enemy position 1 from being able to use that farm as safely. Perhaps most commonly, you'll see a Pocket taking the enemy's left side tier 3 camp. I mean, for you it will be on the right side of the map, but for them it's their left. It's the one that spawns right next to the Sinners and Air Vent. And so for Pocket, it's okay to hold this tool in their arsenal for a while off cooldown, because they aren't necessarily losing out if they don't use it immediately, because by holding it, they can instead deny more farm from the enemy position 1, which should, in theory, make them weaker relative to your position 1. So we employ the same logic as Lash here, since we have a good amount of escape. Especially in the early to mid game where people will lack a lot of the ways to shut us down for now and use cultists, well, yes, to farm, but more so to deny the enemy farm, so that we can drag this match out long enough so that our build actually works as intended. I think the only other item I need to explain here is Shadow Weave, and it's here because I think it might be severely underrated. This thing is basically old Infuser, if you remember when it was like a tier 1 item? Was it tier 1? It technically has a conditional, but it is effectively a button that immediately gives you the buffs that it says it gives. Which, for our purposes, is almost purely that extra 25 spirit power, which is nothing to scoff at, because that's only 3 less than the spirit power that Surge of Power gives, and the ambush spirit power from Weave can be applied to all of your abilities. That is to say, you can Shadow Weave immediately Ground Strike and Flog, and both abilities will get the extra power, unlike Surge of Power, which would only affect the imbued one, of course. And finally, we have the last row. We are heavily dependent on our Flog cooldown, so Witchmail feels like a given. If you're behind, though, you should probably skip this. Echo Shard, however, is non-negotiable. This effectively doubles our damage output since we're obviously using it on Flog. By the way, you will get called a terrorist and other mean words that I can't repeat for doing this by both the enemy team and yours. Yes, Echo Shard got nerfed, but it actually doesn't really matter. You only want to recast it one time anyways, because once you use everything you want to hop right out, because at the end of the day, you're still playing Lash and that's how you play the hero. Spiritual Overflow is actually just better than Boundless Spirit, and our AP setup will let us proc it easily before we go in to use our abilities. Mystic Reverb is really only here because I didn't know what else to put in this build, and I'm not sure that this is a good buy. Now, I'm just going to talk about something that's been on my mind for a sec while you watch the build in action in the background, and that is the gaming community's most misunderstood term, that is the carry. I bring this up, obviously, because I liken the Flog build to a spirit carry, and it just got me thinking about this point that frustrates me. See, in MOBAs, the term carry has a completely different meaning from the colloquial understanding, sort of. It comes from League of Legends, as far as I know, as League's position 1 is known as the ADC, the attack damage carry. In this sense, carry isn't a verb but a noun. It is a position. It describes how you play, or your hero that you pick, or your role. Which is incredibly distinct from the verb carry, which is shorthand for carry your team or something, meaning the person who is carrying is doing most of the work. The latter, the verb, is generally used in other game genres, like when a DPS solos the entire enemy team in Overwatch or something. The former, the noun, the ADC, is not inherently the DPS who solos the entire enemy team. They absolutely can be if they farmed correctly, but playing a carry doesn't necessarily mean that you are carrying. Obviously, I assume, the C in ADC is inspired by the verb carry, but the noun carry is regardless the name of the position, even if they aren't carrying. I'm talking about this, A, because it's my video, I do what I want, fuck you. More importantly, B, because technically I make videos to help people understand the game better, because I didn't understand MOBAs when I first started playing the game, and I thought maybe that perspective would make it easier for others with a similar experience to understand what I thought was helpful. Also C, because I want you to see the build in action, and I didn't want the footage just to be raw gameplay with no commentary of any kind, but that's like secondary. tertiary, actually. Anyway, my point is that I urge you to understand this because people seem to get kind of hot-headed when they don't understand the dichotomy between the verb and the noun carry. Because this can kind of frustrate the odd holiday or something who thinks that the fact that she isn't the carry is some kind of attack on her personal abilities. With that being said, my name is FighterJet, and thank you for watching.